background information should be good before we begin this absolute cavalcade of hell. Originally, I was going to make a list about books that I thought could be good movies, but the rules stipulated that it could only be books that had not yet been made into movies and was not, in production or pre-production or anything like that. The problem I ran into was constantly that movies and TV shows got greenlit, and I struggling to get 10 books in because of other draconian rules I had. And about 6 weeks ago I finally said, sod it, I can't do it. There are simply too many movies and too many TV shows that are being, made based on the books that was on this list. So I had to do something else. Now the powers that be, aka the silent gods that decides what I'm reviewing and what lists I'm making, I was going to ask them what my next project was going to be. It was going to be a list. I knew from the start it was going to be some kind of, positive list, because the foul stench that my list of the worst action movies of all time left in me, I wanted to have a palate cleanser. And I was going to get it. But before I could do that, I went to bed one night, 6 or 7 weeks ago, and I was laying there, and all of a sudden, some evil part of my brain said, "What about the video game movies?" I couldn't stop listening to this voice, and I knew that I had to do this. And I also knew that I had to do a little bit of research with this one, because this wasn't going to be like the best Western movies of all time or the best historical dramas of all time or something like that. This is like disaster movies. Video game movies are, different genres. There are, fantasy movies and adventure movies and martial arts movies and action films and stuff like that. That is based on video game. And I realized that there was a lot of movies I hadn't seen. So I have spent the last 6 weeks watching some of the most heinous acts of cinematic gang rape I have ever seen in my entire life. This was a rough watch. And I have ended up with 20 movies in total. 10 on the list and actually 10 on the dishonorable mentions, making this like almost 30 to 35% of the entire roster of movies. When I did my worst action films of all time, they were, even worse than this one, but they were, movies I had seen within decades of watching movies, and, based on hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of movies. This is 20 movies out of not even 50, I think. So, and I've seen most of these ones just the last 2 years, but most of them the last 6 weeks. Oh boy, so that's why I feel a little bit worn out, actually. And this list is not going to be for the faint of heart. This list is not going to be pleasant at all. I think fighting Brock Lesnar for reals is when you've stolen his hunting rifle is going to be more fun than doing this list. And here we go, I guess. Now, one thing I should mention that is I am the Wikstrand movie fanatic. I am not the Wikstrand video game fanatic. My experience in video games are not that big. I played some, video games earlier when I was a kid, but growing up I got, less and less interested in them. And even though the video games just keep getting, more gorgeous with bigger graphic and greater stories and stuff like that, I couldn't, I really couldn't get into them. They were too expensive and they took too much time and they took too much effort, and I got bored with them really fast. So with every movie on this list, I'm going to show you a little bit of what I know about the video game and how much experience I have with it. If it will affect how I feel about the movie or not, well, that's for the future to tell, I guess. Oh, I almost forgot. Before we get started, we must talk about this guy. He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. The greatest movie troll.
Well, who is it?
Well, it's Uwe Boll. Yeah, that is me. Yes, Uwe Boll, he will dominate this list. He will absolutely dominate this list. The patron saint of jumping the shark, the master of shitty movies. I don't know who is the shittier filmmaker, him or Tyler Perry. It's a really, really tight call there. Now, for those who do not know it, Uwe Boll started to making video game movies in the early 2000s and became very fastly famous for making horrible movies that had some star power into it, were made for an okay budget but looked like shit and never made a single dime in profit. How could he still keep making money? The answer was German taxation laws and culture, which he apparently could use a loophole in to pull a producers-like scam. Later the law was changed and today Uwe Boll is retired from the filming business and it now resides in Vancouver, where he has opened a German restaurant because apparently he thought that Vancouver lacked restaurants with German cuisine. So I hope he is better at fine dining than filmmaking, because he's shitty at that. I had at a point an idea of trying to limit the number of Uwe Boll movies, but then I realized that's not fair. I never do that to anybody. I never try to give anybody any perks or try to run down anybody. So if you think that there are too many Uwe Bolls work on this list, fair enough. But I have yapped too long about this. It's probably because I really don't want to start this, because I will probably just lose my mind. Here is the list. Watch this one. I watched so much crap for you, and I also think I died for your sins. So which movies are allowed to be in this list? I decided that I was going to go pretty broad with this one, which means that it can be any genre, it can be any country. So far, so normal. But some movies on this list you could argue isn't a proper video game movie. You could argue that a lot of movies on this list shouldn't be on this list. Mainly because, well, they're so far removed from the source material that shouldn't count, which is one of the main criticisms that these horrendously awful movies do face when they're being scrutinized. And I'm fine by that, but if they are sequels to a movie that has had some form of connection with a video game or a computer game or something like that, then it is on the list. Doom, based on the Doom franchise. My experience of it, I have finished actually Doom and Doom 2. I played Doom 3 for about 15 minutes and I said, nope, not doing that again. I will say one thing before we begin. Doom Annihilation that came 2019 is not going to be on this list. Why? Because it was actually kinda good. And also, my expectations for it were so low that maybe, just maybe, it was able to squeeze itself out of this just by not being a terrible movie. Doom, on the other hand, had so much hype going on around itself. It was, starring Dwayne Johnson, it had Carl Urban in it. It was a movie that many people, including myself, were looking forward to. And then we saw it and we thought it was kind of not that good. I rewatched this movie, totally unrelated, about 5 months ago, just for fun. And I discovered something when I was, 15-20 minutes into this movie that made me go, never thought about that. And once you realize it, you cannot unsee it. Whenever something happened in that movie, everybody starts running and they're playing this, adrenaline pumping metal track. And then they just stop after 20 seconds. And then they do it over and over and over and over again. And Nothing happens in this movie. And when I realized this, when I remembered that, I kind of had remembered that, I just went, Jesus Christ, this movie is crap. It's a sea alien, basically, with zombies, but it is too embarrassed to utter the name zombie. So it just call it something else. It is depressingly boring, incredibly unepic, considering how much they could have done with it. And also they went too close at one point, you know, when they went POV shot and shooting people. That was kind of, well, now I don't want to see that either because it's just boring. And it is just, you know, not pretty to look at. Doom was a fucking mess, man. Double Dragon. Based on the Double Dragon games. My experience of the game, I have finished Double Dragon 1 and I played some Double Dragon 3, I think. But I haven't played anything else about it. I played the arcade version. This has absolutely nothing to do with the Double Dragon franchise. They dress up like cosplaying almost for about 5 minutes in their red and blue ridiculous costumes, and that looked kind of fun. The rest of it is just a bad action movie in a post-apocalyptic city that tries to be some kind of Mad Max meets Blade Runner meets God knows what. It's incredibly hokey, it's incredibly sad, it's very, very silly, and it has barely anything to do with anything. It's just a bad action film from the mid-90s. Street Fighter, based on the Street Fighter franchise. My experience of the game. Well, I played Street Fighter 2, which I thought was kind of fun, and that's about it. Another hokey action movie from the mid-90s. Jean-Claude Van Damme plays Guile, Raul Julia plays Bison, and Kylie Minogue plays Cammy. I must give them some credit for actually looking like the people that they're playing and, you know, giving their poses and stuff like that. But this is just a big, incredibly hokey, enormously silly action movie that you absolutely can't take seriously in any way. I will give the movie props for that it actually, you know, makes you feel that you are in a video game because nothing makes any sense whatsoever. There are a fun few little, you know, sequences that are kind of cool, and Zangief has the best line in the entire movie. But all these colorful characters are completely wasted in this absolute wasteland of entertainment. It is a bit sad that Raul Julia's last movie role was M. Bison before his death, but at least he is the most memorable thing of the entire movie, and at least he seems to enjoy himself. Jean-Claude Van Damme, however, is completely off in this movie, to the point where you're actually thinking, is he parodying himself? Resident Evil, the last chapter, based on the Resident Evil games. My experience of the game? None. I have never played a single second of Resident Evil, and I haven't watched anybody else play either. The Resident Evil movies were never high art or anything like that, but the first two movies I thought was kind of fun. Then it gradually became less and less fun as the franchise went on, but at least they had a finale to it. Resident Evil Final Chapter is a dumb movie. This movie effectively combined all the worst aspects of all the previous Resident Evil movies to a bizarre burrito of boredom and badness, and I just didn't care. Bad special effects, horrible script, and people you're supposed to care about but never gets to see, you know, on screen. They're just mentioning like, oh, we have to save those people within 48 hours or they're dead. We never get to see them. That is one thing I was really annoyed by. It felt like they wanted to end this franchise about 2 or 3 movies ago, and this was just a load of absolute horseshit. House of the Dead, based on House of the Dead, the arcade game. My experience of the game, I played this one outside of a movie theater before I was going to see some movie like 2008 or 2009 or something like that. But I thought that was kind of a fun thing. This is the first Uwe Boll movie on this list, and God knows it won't be the last. This movie has 2.0 stars on IMDb, and when I sat down to watch this movie, I said to myself, well, this is going to be one of the worst movies on the entire list. It ended up not being that case. My expectations at that point were so low, were so incredibly low that it could have jumped over this bar just by falling over it. Maybe I had experienced so much horrible stuff that this was simply like saying, well, this rectal cancer was not as bad as I thought this rectal cancer was going to be. Maybe, but the movie is still bad. It's really, really, really bad. I mean, the 360 spin around, the inconsequential on whether or not these people are badasses or complete losers, and the extreme amount of dumb lines they have, and you know, the story about, you know, them going to a island where they have the most low attended raid in daylight I've ever seen, looked in the beginning to be so terrible. And the bad jump scares and the bad zombie action, it made this movie look like a really shitty Italian zombie film. But then the movie kind of kicks in. That's when the really, you know, hokey bad stuff comes in, and when they just mow down zombies like they were nothing. But I must say that I was kind of entertained by that. When a hot Asian chick martial arts kicks the zombies to death and a hot black chick is, you know, shooting the shit out of them, and when a not cosmetically pleasing Jürgen Prochnow is slicing and dicing, I am kind of into this. I mean, it is still bad. It is still laughably awful. The production value looks fucking ridiculous. The lines are, you know, beyond bad, and everything looks kind of terrible. The only connection this movie actually has to the arcade game, you know what that is? They spliced in actual game footage in the transition shots. I am dead serious. I am dead serious. Once, you know, every 10 to 15 minutes, they just had 1 to 2 seconds of, you know, action from the game in the movie to remind us that this movie is based on the video game. That is how close they were. Should you see this movie? Fuck no. This is an awful movie, but considering how bad it could have been, I'm kind of surprised that it wasn't even worse. In the Name of the King 3, the final mission, based on Dungeon Siege. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. You see, Dungeon Siege, that came out in like 2006, I think it was a bad movie. It was called In the Name of the King, a Dungeon Siege Tale, based on the Dungeon Siege games. And it had almost nothing to do with that. But then they made 2 sequels that also had nothing to do with it, and even less so. And here is where I think that people might have issues with that this movie is in this list. But I don't care, because I have to talk about how fucking dreadfully awful this movie was. So, you have a fantasy game. By the way, my experience of the game of Dungeon Siege was not that much. I have played the demo of it, I think. So how do you follow up a $60 million fantasy movie filled with so-and-so stars, actually? Well, you make a $3.5 million movie with no stars in it. You stuck it, of course, in modern-day Sofia in Bulgaria, where we have some fucking hitman who kidnaps, you know, prepubescent girls and locks them into containers. Our hero, everybody. But then he's, you know, swooped off to another dimension where, you know, there are knights and dragons and stuff like that, and he is the chosen one or some shit like that, and he has to, you know, fight some evil guy or something like that. The dragon effects here are so terrible that, you know, the old Godzilla movies look like they have the sharpest effects on the planet compared to this one. In the Name of the King 3 is filled with bad action sequences, ill choreographed fight sequences, low production value, and is about as interesting as watching paint dry in slow motion. So who do we have starring in this one, by the way? Dominic Purcell, the absolute charisma vacuum that sucks in all the charisma from every other, and it's a movie that nobody should see ever, even though I must say that the finale at least had some sort of originality to it. It did stuff that other movies I've seen didn't do, even though nothing made sense and everything was kind of dumb. Blood Rain 2, based on the Blood Rain games. My experience, I have never played them. Hey, we have vampires and we have Western settings and we have bad acting and we have rain and we have Rain who is a vampire in the rain, and absolutely nobody cares. This movie is very lame, and the action sequences are terrible, but at least it has different settings than many other movies on this list. At least the Western setting is something unique to this movie, and that's the only positive thing I can say about it, because this is basically a bad Western movie combined with a bad vampire movie, and we have lame sword plays and bad gunplay, and the settings makes the Rawhide look like Deadwood in comparison. Whew, this movie was a tough one to get through. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, based on the Final Fantasy games. My experience, I played the Final Fantasy VII, the demo, and for about 5 minutes, then I got bored and I never played it again. The 9 months to a year that preceded the release of this movie was hype overload. Everybody was talking about this movie. Everybody was talking about the digital stuff, and that everything was going to be photorealistic, and that this was going to be the end of normal actors, because the digital acting was going to take over and everything was going to change. Hollywood was going to change. Were you ready for this one? Everybody talked about this movie before it came out. Nobody talked about the movie after it had come out. Nobody cared. The story is just so mundane. This was just vanilla post-apocalyptical stuff with no personality, no soul, no depth to it at all. It had a pretty impressive amount of well-known actors in the voice acting category, but they couldn't save it. And this movie probably could have been not even on this list, or a bit lower on this list, if it hadn't been like I was so hyped for this. And when I actually saw it, I just said, I've seen this in many other movies, but they have been better than this one. And after a couple of minutes, you sort of kind of forgotten all about the impressive visuals, and then you sort of said, well, what's the point of it? It probably would have been cheaper to shoot this one. This is a normal action sci-fi fantasy movie. There are moments in this movie that really looked impressive back in 2001, but it has aged pretty bad, and looking at it today, it looks like a so-and-so cutscene from a modern video game. That's the kindest thing I can say about it. It is just so forgettable. It aimed so high and it felt so hard. Wing Commander, based on the Wing Commander games. My experience of the game, I played Wing Commander 2 and I especially played Wing Commander 3. I thought Wing Commander 3 was an awesome thing because it was Mark Hamill in a sci-fi concept, not a Star Wars movie, because that would never happen, we thought, in the late 90s. And it was a fun, flight simulator, and I also think it had a pretty okay story. Then the movie came. Once again, I was pretty hyped. Even though this movie only carried a $30 million budget, I said to myself, well, it is still going to be a very fun movie. I mean, you have this amazing war with these aliens and stuff like that, and it's going to be one of these space opera things, and it's not going to be Star Wars level awesomeness of a movie, but it is going to be a fun sci-fi movie, and we don't get those too many times. What we got was one of the most boring and most uninteresting movies I have ever seen in my entire life. Nothing happens. Everybody was just whining and complaining, and Saffron Burrows looked like she wanted to be somewhere else. In a dentist chair, I think, without Novocaine. This movie had so many bad fucking lines, this movie had so many bad fucking cliches, and this movie just might have one of the dumbest and lamest endings to a movie I have ever seen. It was just, when I saw it, I said, what? Are you fucking kidding me? Tomb Raider. Based on the Tomb Raider games, my experience, I have played Tomb Raider 2, I think. But I played it for about 2 weeks and then I got bored with it and I never played any of the games again. When it was announced that it was Academy Award winning actress Angelina Jolie that was going to play the buxom archaeologist, everybody got very excited. But what did we get? We got a huge budget, a pair of big tits, and we got an ill-shot and ill-directed action movie that wanted to be James Bond and it wanted to be Indiana Jones in one big package, but managed to be neither. The movie looked good, the movie felt big, but it had a dumb, super dumb story. It had laughable villains, it had bad special effects, and it had a story no one cared about, and all the action sequences just felt contrived, and none of it felt natural, and none of it felt real, and everything just felt phony and plastic and boring. Oh. And we have 10 more to go. This is not gonna be fun, you guys. Before we begin, I wanted to end on a sort of positive note. So here are the 3 best movies based on video games that have ever been made, in my opinion. Detective Pikachu, based on the Detective Pikachu games. My experience of it, none. Detective Pikachu isn't exactly high art or anything like that, but it is a fun adventure, and my experience with Pokemon is very low. I was too old for it and I thought it was lame and dumb, but I at least, recognize the characters, and Ryan Reynolds is always a lot of fun. This movie relies very heavily on the comedic timing of Ryan Reynolds. Thank God he is Ryan Reynolds, and thank God he actually could pull it through. This was a kind of fun movie. It didn't take itself too seriously, but it took itself serious enough that I guess a lot of the hardcore fans could, see stuff they have always wanted to see. And I think that this is the better movie to make if you're going to try to make a movie that is somehow connected to the Pokemon universe, because I think trying to make a live action movie with actual Pokemon fights and stuff like that, it's not going to work. Rampage. Based on Rampage. My experience of the game, none. This movie is 100% dumb, but the movie also knows that it is 100% dumb. So when you have a wolf the size of an aircraft carrier fighting, a gigantic ape in Chicago, and you have a gigantic crocodile that is big as an airline cruiser, jumps off of the river and starts tearing shit apart. It's fun. It's really dumb. But this movie doesn't try to answer difficult questions, stuff like that. It just wants to entertain, and it actually succeeds doing it pretty well, I would say. Warcraft, the beginning, based on the Warcraft games. My experience of the games, well, I've played Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 3. I think Warcraft 3 is fucking amazing. I haven't played any World of Warcraft because that isn't my type of game. I love the Warcraft games, and I think this movie is a lot of fun. This movie is, in its heart and soul, a pretty standard fantasy movie, but I think it's very well made. It has some pretty okay acting, and it has some pretty great visuals, and it has a cast of characters that I think is very interesting. It felt like this movie was trying very, very hard to be a really good representation of Warcraft, and I thought that they nailed multiple things in this one just right. It wasn't perfect, It wasn't a fantastic movie or anything like that, but I think that if you are a big fan of the Warcraft franchise, I think you can find a lot of stuff to like here. However, this marks the end of the positive. From now on, it's just downhill from here. Now we go to the actual list. Jesus Christ, pray for us. Number 10, In the Name of the King 2, The Two Worlds, based on, well, allegedly it is based on the Dungeon Siege games, since this is the first sequel to In the Name of the King, a Dungeon Siege tale. So maybe this should also be considered to be taken off the list simply because that it was, so far away from the original game. In a nutshell, In the Name of the King 2 is the same story as In the Name of the King 3, with a slightly higher budget and a slightly bigger star, in this case Dolph Lundgren, of all fucking people. But that was not enough. Now, this movie is worse because this movie looked even more ramshackle. It looked even more Bush League than In the Name of the King 3. The ending for this one was even more stupid than the ending for In the Name of the King 3. And if that wasn't dumb enough, and if that wasn't bad enough, I think that despite this movie is more expensive than the third one, the sequences with the dragon, they actually look even more terrible than that one. And Dolph Lundgren just looks so bored and he wants to be somewhere else so badly. The story about him being a karate champion or dojo master or stuff like that in modern day Canada, it was weird. I didn't see that one coming, I can guarantee that. But as happened in the third movie, he's transported into this other world, which is shot in Black Forest, Bavaria, I think. The only thing this movie has going for itself that it makes it look at least acceptable is the fact that the cinematography is pretty good. By the way, I think that means that the best shots in this movie are made where there are no fucking actors in it. This movie has even less interesting story. It's basically the same story as the third one, but it is even more uninteresting. He is the chosen one. He's going to kill, this witch or some stuff like that. But maybe all the, talks about, who is bad and who is good is gonna be turned on its head. Oh, you think? When I can see a switch coming, when I can see a twist coming, that means that the twist is so, blatantly telegraphed that you could basically hang a sign on the guy saying, I'm the bad guy of this movie. It is a sad movie to sit through, and although it is pretty short, it feels longer than a fucking season. Number 9, Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life, based on the Tomb Raider games. Let's go back in history to the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. Now Jay Leno would, have these, small articles that he would read about and, make some fun little stuff about, and he would read stuff, and he would read it to Kevin Eubanks, and they would have some banters, and it would be fun. He read something about this movie about 4 or 5 months, I think, before this movie hit theaters, where he said something like, and I am paraphrasing here, in our article here I read that Angelina Jolie says they're not going to focus too much on her boobs in the next Lara Croft movie, and they're not going to be as potent as they were in the other movie. He then puts down the newspaper and said, yeah, I know a lot of guys complained about that. Yeah, the movie was okay, but I think her breast was really too big. Idiots. Now the problem with this movie isn't the bust size of Lara Croft. The problem with this movie is the entire fucking movie. This movie has so many places to shoot. They have so many locations around the world. They have Jared Butler. They have skydiving sequences. They have so much going on. They had this vast, enormous, budget they could use, and it feels like a low budget movie. I don't know what they did, but nothing happens in this movie. Absolutely nothing happens. The skydiving sequence in, was it Shanghai or Hong Kong? I think it was Shanghai. Is the only sequence in the entire movie where I went, ooh, that's kind of nifty. Everything else is just more contrived than in the first one. And I am straight up refusing to understand what Angelina Jolie was doing when she was doing some kind of a weird routine with a bayoneted rifle. She was doing some kind of a stomping thing and was doing stuff, and people were, running towards her, and she was just fighting them off. It is the dumbest and most ludicrously idiotic fighting sequence I have ever seen in my entire life. The story about, finding Pandora's box or whatever is sidelined to nothing. This movie is a big ball of nothing. Whenever an action sequence comes up, they just have this long setup sequence when they're trying, well, I'm gonna jump up here and you're gonna fly with this helicopter over there, and then I'm gonna do this, and they're gonna run off, and all of a sudden, well, it's over, nothing really happened. I think this is the reason why this movie, that technically has better production value, has better cinematography, has better music, has better actors, has better lots of stuff than the absolute garbage we saw in the dishonorable mentions. Why this one is on number 9 and not there is for the reason that this movie aimed higher and sank lower. And when I saw this movie, I was just so bored that I almost fell asleep, and I never fall asleep when I'm watching a movie. This was an ultra bomb in the box office, and it took them over 10 years before they attempt to make a new Tomb Raider movie, and probably they're gonna, wait 10 more years to do one more after the sort of failure with Alicia Vikander. Tomb Raider: The Cradle of Life is probably the most expensive action movie I have ever seen where so little happens. Even though it's still better than Godzilla. Ugh, Godzilla. Number 8, Street Fighter: The Legend of Chung. Once again based on the Street Fighter games. What happens if you take away the humor, you take away the hokiness, and you take away the likeness of the characters from the actual game to the sequel of Street Fighter? You get Street Fighter: The Legend of Chung. There were minor buzzes around this movie before it came out. I saw it and I thought, bad that. This is just an incredibly boring martial arts movie. It is just so soulless. It wants nothing. It's just so afraid that it's to be mistaken for the old hokey one. But I would much rather see the old hokey one than this boring ass shit. I like the idea that they're focusing on this one character. Chung was one of the most popular characters from the Street Fighter games, and I can understand why they wanted to do this, but they forgot that they needed a story. And apart from the boring story and laughably lame fighting sequences, this movie really has nothing. It is just a terribly boring and underwhelming fighting movie. If the original Street Fighter movie would never have existed, this movie would have still been bad, but at least it wouldn't have been so boringly bad that you're wishing for a bad hokey movie instead of this even worse boring movie. Number 7, Blood Rain. So here is the original Blood Rain movie, the first in the trilogy. It had a pretty impressive cast list. I mean, you had Michael Madsen, Michelle Rodriguez, you had Udo Kier, you had Ben Kingsley, Billy Zane, and you have an overacting Meatloaf in a Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart wig doing one of the most impressive I've ever seen. It was great. The movie really can't decide what it wants to be. No one seems to care about anything, everybody acts completely weirdly, and sure, you could argue that this movie actually should be better than Blood Rain 2 because, you know, it has better production value and it has better actors. But the fact is that the actors in this one are almost as bad as they are in Blood Rain 2, which makes Blood Rain 2 somehow being slightly better because you're thinking, what the hell is Michael Madsen doing? He looks like he's bored out of his skull and drunk of his ass. We just have so many weird stuff going on in this movie. And I can't get over the fact that vampires in this movie are allergic to water. Even Stephanie Meyer's Sparkling Vampires is more okay in my opinion than vampires being allergic to water. This is insane, you guys. Jesus Christ. We have a bunch of horrible lines. We have a terrible script, we have weird characters, we have bad editing, we have some of the worst practical effects I have ever seen in my entire life. Everything looks at the same time, you know, big budget and ramshackle at the same time. If you were ever a bit curious about why Uwe Boll sucks, this is probably his crowning achievement of, you know, enjoyments and suckiness. And this movie is so bad that it actually becomes a little entertaining on top of things. I'm struggling to find words to describe exactly how terrible this movie is. The movie about, you know, the half human, half vampire, played by Christina Loken. She isn't exactly, you know, a Meryl Streep or anything like that. And her fighting skills are, you know, okay at best. There isn't a sequence in this movie that Uwe Boll can't absolutely fuck up with some small little details. And I'm thinking, is he trolling us? Is he actually trolling us? How much dumber can this get and how much more insane can this get? Jesus Christ, we have more Uwe Boll movies coming up, I think. Fuck! Number 6. Mortal Kombat Annihilation, based on Mortal Kombat 1 and Mortal Kombat 2. My experience, I have actually finished both Mortal Kombat 1 and Mortal Kombat 2. I like those two games quite a lot actually. Mortal Kombat! Few things are as adrenaline pumping as the first 30 to 40 seconds of the two Mortal Kombat movies from 1995-1997. The screams, the introduction of New Line Cinema, the fires, and then Mortal Kombat, boom! It is just, yeah! And you're getting pumped up. And then the movie actually has to start and you're realizing, oh, Jesus, it's kind of dumb and the fight sequences are bad and everything looks really hokey. Now, Mortal Kombat was a bad movie, but at least it was a movie. Mortal Kombat Annihilation, on the other hand, oh boy, it is just stuffed to the gills with bad fighting sequences. When you're thinking, oh, we're out of this one, and you have another, you know, bad fighting sequence, and introducing new characters willy-nilly and stuff that doesn't make any sense, and some of the worst acting I've ever seen. Mother, I thought you were dead. Too bad, you will be. And to top it all off, they have also replaced the terrible actors from the first Mortal Kombat movies with even more terrible actors. I didn't thought that was possible, but they somehow found a way. Mortal Kombat has the gall I say, to end with maybe the worst special effects I have seen in a, you know, okay budgeted movie ever. It's fucking ridiculous how bad they are. And I remember seeing this, you know, back in 1997, and I thought to myself, that looks kind of bad. Jesus fucking Christ. And it didn't get any better from there. It's bad, it is lame, it's ridiculous, it is just fight, which are bad, and then, oh, we're gonna go to new location now. What are we gonna do now? Fight. And everything looks the same, and nothing looks impressive, and everything is bad. And oh, by the way, we're not done yet with bad movies based on fighting games. Oh no. Number 5, DOA, Dead or Alive, based on the Dead or Alive games. My experience of the games, Not any, I think. I don't think I've ever played any Dead or Alive games. The only thing I knew about them is that it apparently features a lot of the scantily clad babes, and I think you can play volleyball too, in some form or fashion. Well, I don't know. At this point, when this movie came out, it was clear to the world that everybody had absolutely given up when it comes to video game based movies. I saw the trailer for this one and I thought, oh shit, this is bad. It looked like Mortal Kombat Annihilation and the Charlie's Angels movies has had a baby, and the baby was fucking stupid. So I said to myself, when we had gotten to the island and the girls were, beginning the tournament and the fights were gonna happen, here, there, everywhere. And I was thinking to myself, well, this is a really weird movie. It's a weird combination of the objectification of the Charlie's Angels movies with the terribly choreographed fight sequences from the Mortal Kombat movies. It's not that entertaining, but at least it is not, overly complicated and, so lame yet. But then things got stupid. Because then they introduce a new little thing into the mix. This thing is so dumb and it is so insanely idiotic that I thought myself, you can't possibly be serious. But they were serious. And they told me, you take this serious now too. And I said, nope, not gonna do it. What happens next is a confusing cavalcade of absolute bullshit. The special effects are terrible. The lines that they have to speak are so awful that the Twilight movies start to sound like Shakespeare. And to top it all off, nothing makes sense anymore. And I actually somehow wish that we could go back to a simpler time where somebody would just yell Mortal Kombat and play dun 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 dun. And it will at least, be more entertaining than this. Ooh, this was a rough one. Number 4, Blood Rain 3, The Third Reich. So Christina Loken was replaced in the third movie with this chick. I don't think I've ever seen anybody with less talent than she had. She made Christina Loken look like fucking Meryl Streep. I mean, Loken was one-dimensional and she was uninteresting, but at least she had some kind of character. This is just a cardboard cutout. I mean, sure, she has a bunch of pretty nice titties, but apart from that, she has absolutely nothing. So finally, Rain is going to, take on the Nazis. And what happens next is about 80 minutes of absolute nonsense. We have a bunch of characters, we have no idea who they are, we have no idea what they want or what their plan is. Or we don't know where we are, we don't know when this is. We just know it is the Third Reich and the Nazis are looking forward to, creating Nazi vampires, and a Nazi Hitler actually shows up in a dream sequence. That was fun. But then we have just these terribly cheap action sequences that make the other Blood Rain movies actually look kind of okay. You basically stop caring after about 2 or 3 minutes. You just lay down and hope that, the world will end or something like that. Just don't maybe watch more of this movie. This movie barely has a 3-act structure. This movie barely has a script. I guess there is some kind of stuff that happens, but I don't care. I just want this movie to end. Hell, I want this list to end, damn it. But we are not out yet. Number 3, Tekken 2. Based on the Tekken games. My experience of these games, well, I have seen other people play it, and it seems like it's a pretty fun fighting game. No more, no less. Okay, so we have a guy, he wakes up in a hotel room and he has amnesia. I don't remember his name and I don't remember who played him. That's about as much as of a impact he has made on me already. Already you can see this movie is off from a great start. Fun! Then he ends up in some kind of a, cult leader, mafia boss, community leader who, want to train him to be an assassin. What does this have to do with the Tekken movies, you might ask? I ask the same question, and I have no idea. So he goes around and he kills a bunch of people. I don't care about that. Can we get to a tournament or something like that? Can he fight somebody? Oh, he's fighting somebody. And it is really, really bad. Now, I ragged a lot on Street Fighter The Legend of Chung for it being, you know, badly choreographed, and it was really awful, and you know, it lacked soul. But at least it did have some okay production value. This movie doesn't even have the production value, and it is a PG-13 movie. Jesus Christ, this is not gonna end well, is it? After a long movie. No, wait a minute, it's only about 1 hour in actually, where we get to this sort of ending, and there it, you know, totally goes off the rail. Because up until then, we have just been very bored, and we have just been very uninterested in everything that's happening. But then we get to the ending, and then stuff happens, and he gets to fight two people who I don't know who they are in slow motion. And then the movie is over, and they're teasing a third movie where they're gonna go to the Tekken tournament, which they have teased a little bit from time to time. Are you fucking kidding me? A sequel baiting after this fucking atrocity. This was, what is it, 95 minutes of so little action and so bad fighting. It was so ill choreographed and it was so boring that I'm having problem describing how bad it was. And when I don't even want to know who this guy is and what he has amnesia from, that is when the movie completely falls off the rails. And we have 2 more to go. Pray for us. Number 2, Alone in the Dark. Based on the Alone in the Dark games. My experience of the games, I have played a little bit of Alone in the Dark, which I thought was kind of a fun little scary game, but I got bored about it after, you know, an hour or so, and then I never played it again. There are moments in cinema history where you see something and you say, you can't come back from this one. You absolutely can't. This movie features 2 such moments. There rarely a movie has 1, but 2. Holy fucking shit. We'll begin with the first one. I'm not gonna talk that much about the movie itself. It is a bad horror action movie with bad writing, terrible directing, terrible editing, and lame characters and all that stuff that we have been used to with Uwe Boll. But this one features 2 things that actually tops everything, that trumps all of them. The first sequence is when one of the soldiers in the cave, when they have been fighting off these zombies in the, you know, end of the movie, and she's dead, when they have been looking at these things that comes up off the ground and say, shoot them, shoot them, shoot them, but they just stand there, they don't do anything, and they just blah, 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 and she's dead. And they said, oh, she's dead, and they walk out of frame. When they do that, she moves her head. She tilts her head to the left, or was it right? I can't remember. I was like, what? I had to rewind and see it again. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? You couldn't do another take when she was lying still? That was bad. That made me angry. But I was already so fucking pissed from the first sequence that I said to myself, well, it wasn't at least as bad, because do you know what fucking happened? Now, I'm going to tell you about the second sequence that was even worse, because we have Christian Slater, you know, the paranormal investigator who, you know, goes around and has inner monologues and who we don't care a single fucking shit about. And then we have his former girlfriend, Tara Reid, who is a fucking scientist in this movie with glasses, so we know that she's smart. Great casting decision there, buddy. And they are having a good old fun action sequence when the monsters come in and everybody's shooting and we don't know who's shooting at what, and everything is in the dark, so we have no idea what's going on. But then when everything seems to be lost, then Steven Dorff and his merry band of monster-killing lunatics, bust into the window and start... And everything is sort of, yeah, this is bad. I thought, this is terrible. This is so awful. This is so lame. It's so badly made. I thought to myself, how could this be worse? How could they make this worse? They found a way, because Steven Dorff is standing with his back to one of the monsters who are going to run over and kill him. But Christian Slater, he shoots at the monster falls down. Steven Dorff turns around and realizes that Christian Slater saved his life, and he sort of gives him a little bit of a, hey, you're okay, man. Do you know what was the problem with that sequence? I'm gonna tell you. When Christian Slater fired his gun, the shot went 2 fucking meters over the head of the monster, and then he fell over. Was it the wind that killed him? No. This was a thing done in post-production. So either, number one, somebody deliberately did this. Uwe Boll saw this and didn't care. Or Uwe Boll didn't see this because he also didn't care. So this was either because of negligence or because of trolling. He was either incompetent or he was deliberately pissing us off. I don't know which one is worse. The rest of the movie is just a big old jumbled mess of bad inner monologues, terrible acting, bad action sequences, and the 2-finger stinker that was the ending of this movie should have been, the icing on the cake that made this movie the worst movie of all time based on a video game. But it wasn't. There is one movie that came out almost 30 years ago that changed the course of movie history, and not for the better. It might be because of its historical value. It might be because of its cultural impact that made this movie to be even worse. Or it might be the case that it broke my heart when I saw it. I was unaware of that movies could be so bad at that very young age when I saw this movie for the first time. So take that for what it is. But let's go to number one. And number one, Super Mario Brothers. Based on the Super Mario Brothers games. My experience of the game. Well, I've played Super Mario 1, I played Super Mario 2, I played Super Mario 3, I have played some Super Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros. Melee. A couple of those games. That's about it. Okay, so if Bob Hoskins can't lift your smile, then you have serious problems. Bob Hoskins plays Mario and John Leguizamo plays Luigi. They are actual plumbers in New York City who ends up in, some kind of an underground city run by, was it King Koopa? I think it was King Koopa, played by Donald Trump. I mean by Dennis Hopper. And we also have, his Goombas. They are basically these big burly guys with small heads, and Josh is a street musician, and what the fuck is this? When I saw this movie, I was kind of hyped for it because I played a lot of Super Mario Brothers, and I was kind of, yeah, this is gonna be fun. And the movie began with and all of that, and then we had the dinosaurs, and then everything went to shit. This movie does have its 90s hokey charm to it, but it isn't enough. Because this movie is so offensive to everything that has to do with movie making. It makes no sense. I don't think I've ever seen anybody being more miserable in this movie than Dennis Hopper, because he just want to be somewhere else doing anything else than being in this fucking movie. Maybe there are movies that technically are worse movies on this list, but this one was so fucking bad. Not only because of the terrible acting, not only because of the terrible action sequences, not only because of the nonsensical plot, of the plot holes and everything like that. I think the reason why this struck a nerve with me was the fact that this was the first movie that was based on a video game. This would set the standards for what would come next. How did it pan out? It showed the entire world that video game based movies was bad. It showed Nintendo that if they would lend their properties to somebody, they would make a bad job of, exploring it. And Nintendo decided then and there that they would have no movies made by their intellectual properties ever, at least not live action. I don't know if they have made some movies based on their products since then, but that ban has been pretty consistent. And imagine all the movies we could have had if this was a good movie, but I don't know really how to make the Super Mario Bros. Into a functioning movie. This is just a weird movie with tonal shifts it goes from grim to playful to almost, so dumb that I'm surprised that, the characters could form sentences. The most bizarre thing of all is that this movie still has backers. There are still people who think that this is a good movie. It is not. This movie is so bad, this movie is so dumb, this movie is so nonsensical that I have trouble coming up with any form of excuse for it. There are no excuse for it. With bad lines, with bad special effects, and maybe because I was so into the Super Mario Bros. Made the fall from grace even higher. I guess it's some kind of a combination, but one thing I do know for sure is I never, ever, ever want to see that movie again for as long as I live. It is one of the most disgusting movies I have ever seen in terms of what it should have been and what it ended up being. And also sequel baiting. You're never gonna believe what I found. Yeah, we know what you found, idiot. You found a way of not having any sequels to this movie. Are we done now? Thank God, Jesus Christ. So, I'll see you next time from, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.